All right, welcome to Halitics. I'm Helgens. We're so glad to be talking today. It is Thursday, almost the end of the week. We got one more day tomorrow, free for all. And as I mentioned, I am actually going to go away. I'll be away this weekend, and I'm hoping I'll still be able to do Monday's program, but that may not happen because I'll be getting in early Monday morning, and I don't know that I'm going to be in a position to, physically put together the program. It takes a while to do it, and I don't want to do something that isn't going to be worth your time or mine, especially yours. If you want to join me today, 240-242-5646, 240-242-5646. Been heartened by a couple new subscribers. So hope you'll join them if you haven't yet. Just click that button right there on the screen at bottom right underneath the bell I just sort of showed you just there. And don't forget, I think really one of the great positive aspects to Halitics is Halitics on Facebook. So it's not just me talking, it's and presenting some visual evidence that I think supports my prognostications, my proposals for a better America, but other folks as well, obviously weighing in. That's what this program is about, trying to come up with solutions to really, really serious problems that we face. Existential threats. And I was asked, why do people use the term existential? It's getting thrown around a lot. Yeah, because really the crises that we are addressing or trying to address or failing to address that confront us really do pose questions, really do challenge our existence, either our specific existence as a species in the way that we are living today, or more I think even more seriously, the actual existence of many species. They're being extinguished because of human activity. So and they're threatened with ever greater loss of biodiversity. So really, these are existential threats. The New York Times, though, I don't think they're serious about addressing those threats. And the cover that I put, the thumbnail that I did today, I think really does point that out. There's a lot of things you can say about Trump and a lot of negative things. And I said yesterday, I've been one who hasn't called him a Nazi, for example. And yes, I've called him a fascist. But he's kind of in some ways, a feckless or ineffective one. Certainly he was in his first term. But I was willing to, and I considered I question my original impulse that Trump wasn't a fascist, or at least not a Nazi, based on his apparently green lighting more bombing, more killing by Israel in Gaza. And I didn't call Biden-Harris Nazis. I don't really think they're fascist, and yet they were all in for, it appeared, certainly the Israeli genocide. So if I'm not going to call them fascist Nazis, why would I call Trump one if he's going to green light more killing and, in fact, support it, which he seemed to do, although it hasn't restarted, right? We aren't seeing that ceasefire. It's precarious, and we've seen a lot of violations by Israel, but still the hostage releases are continuing. So there does seem to be something better right now for Gaza than what we saw. Certainly not as horrible as what we saw during the Harris-Biden, the last year plus of the Harris-Biden administration. So that's a positive. But Trump did authorize the 2K the 2K bombs to be delivered, and the rhetoric is just really ugly. So it is dehumanizing towards the Palestinian people. So, I'm willing to see him as that bad if we see an actual resumption of the atrocity, the killing, the pogrom against the Palestinians, and if we see Trump not taking action to stop it. But we haven't seen that happen, and Time magazine gave a kind of a better perspective, at least if you're trying to find trying not to view Trump as Hitler, which was, hey, he's really still trying to keep this ceasefire alive. He's trying to pressure Hamas to continue to release the hostages. And at the same time, behind the scenes, we're probably seeing a lot of pressure on Netanyahu not to start killing again, at least not in the numbers that we saw. So let's hope that's true. Really, that's like all I can really grasp onto is the hope that we don't resume support for an ongoing Israeli genocide. That's the worst thing I can imagine my country doing. And as an American, I just can't bear the thought of that happening. The New York Times, again, not really serious, in my opinion, about dealing with the problems that we face. And as again, you can say a lot of bad things about Trump. I certainly have. I probably don't say as many bad things as some do. I know I don't, based on what people I've talked to. But look, he is trying to stop the carnage in Eastern Europe that has been going on now for not just 15, 16 months, the way Israel was killing Palestinians in the record numbers, but since 22, so almost 3 years now of war between Russia and Ukraine, a war that didn't have to happen, as Trump has pointed out a number of times, that shouldn't have happened, and that the Harris-Biden administration kept going. So when you have a president, in this case Trump, who's talking to Putin, saying, let's stop this, we've got to get this under control, the killing has to end, we want peace. When Trump said, I want people not to die. For the New York Times to say war with Trump, trying to stop the killing, expect a more dangerous world. That's the headline with Trump's prostration to Putin, expect a more dangerous world. All I can say is, well, that's just insane. That's crazy. You're saying basically, Nick Kristof, war is peace. And I'll go through his explanation for it. I mean, I'm sure he believes it. And you reference Neville Chamberlain, and say, well, they gave, the Daladier for the French and the English just said to Hitler, take Czechoslovakia. And that's exactly what Trump is doing here. And by giving Hitler Czechoslovakia, you made Europe far less safe, right? And that's true. As far as that goes, Munich was a capitulation. And in the end, it did lead to much more carnage and death and destruction. But the situation in Ukraine is so different. It's so not analogous that to draw that analogy, I think, shows you ignorant, unserious, or simply writing what your bosses want you to write and what you think, and probably correctly, many of your audience wants you to write. They're just not the same. Czechoslovakia in 1938 is not Ukraine in 2025. They're not. There's so many differences, and we'll get into those in just a moment. But before we get there, just want to remind folks of really why we are in Ukraine. And I'm going to play some clips from Due Dissidents, the two guys there, Russell and Keaton, who I often praise. And I've got some clips where I don't really agree with them. But they do us a real service where they have this woman, Tusker. I guess she's a foreign policy guru of some sort. And she explains why we're in, why this is going on, why there's been a proxy war with Russia. So I think we should understand it's not about Ukrainian independence or the desire for freedom or democracy lovers in the U.S. government. It's got nothing to do with that. Here's what's going on.
Tusker, why are people always picking on Russia? Because, like I said, because Russia is a very large landmass filled with tons of natural resources, and they have sovereign control over their country. And we don't like it when a country has sovereign control over their resources, no matter where they are in the world, no matter whether they are liberal or communist or fascist. Now, the fascists will work with us because they'll help us get those resources from the people, but the others, not so. So that's always been the problem. They want to balkanize Russia. They want to split it up into tiny little pieces. They literally do want to install puppet governments. Like all the Zelenskys and all the people in Serbia and all those, not Serbia, they're not one. But like all of those people, to have those puppet governments be able to put in their NGOs, be able to run their PSYOP information campaigns, put their ruling class involved, and then they can dangle those countries by a string and suck up all the natural resources. They want to do that with Russia, they want to do it with China, and they want to do it with Iran.
So it's just a question of Western multinational corporations wanting to control the resources that are now controlled by Russia and Putin. Now, this is not a defense of Putin. This isn't saying Putin's anything great. This isn't saying that, we should embrace the Russian model. But the self-righteousness of the American liberal class to argue, to contend that we're on the side of angels in promoting this war is just so absurd. It's just so wrongheaded. And you can just see by who who the Harris-Biden cabinet was. You can see exactly why that war was going on. I mean, beyond the fact that, yes, there's a lot of, there's Russia's a competitor. Russia's a global competitor. They have a lot of oil. They have a lot of resources, and our companies thirst for those, want to have some control over them, and we don't. So that's part of it. But, a big part also, which Tusker doesn't mention, is just it's profitable. That war, what did Trump say? 1 million Russian casualties, maybe not that many, but close to 750,000. And I saw a comment, by the way, really great to see some comments on the YouTube video from yesterday, the live stream, saying there were 150,000 Russian dead. I think that's one approximation. I think others are saying it's a little higher, but when you add all the injured and the casualties and everything else, you're looking at probably north of 500,000 just from Russia alone, not even including Ukraine. So that carnage, which is beyond the loss of human life and the destruction, ruined lives, not just people killed, but they're permanently injured. They have post-traumatic stress disorder. They are their spouse, their children, their parents were killed or permanently injured, maimed. They weren't around for them. I mean, this is the cost of war. And that doesn't even yet take into account the homes leveled, the number of homeless people, the land that was destroyed, people's livelihoods. That's all going on. And none of that seems to, even rattle in the skull of Nicholas Kristof when he says, well, we're in a less safe world. But beyond all that, beyond just all the harm that this war is and how it's made people less safe, and beyond the need for, the desire, the thirst of Western companies, corporations, multinationals to access resources in Russia and Eastern Europe, there's profits, right? I mean, going to war made enormous sums of money for the clients and business connections of 3 members of the Harris-Biden cabinet. Antony Blinken at his, whatever it's called, West Exec Group, where also Avril Haines worked. He was closely connected with Boeing. She was closely connected with Palantir. And Lloyd Austin was on the Raytheon board of directors. This is why we are in Ukraine. This is why we're supplying them with weapons. This is why Antony Blinken said, we're not going to negotiate with Russia until they get out of Ukraine altogether, which meant we weren't going to negotiate with Russia, which meant his clients were going to keep raking in billions of our dollars. That's why we're in Ukraine. That's why we're in Russia. That decision, the decision by Trump to talk to Putin to say this has got to end, isn't going to make us less safe. It's going to make us safer. And for Christoph to say anything different is utterly, completely ridiculous and absurd. But let's get into the specifics. And I want to, and get just to completely throw out the Czechoslovakia analogy. When England and France said to Hitler, go ahead, take the Sudetenland, it wasn't like at that moment Hitler was in the Sudetenland. He had troops massed against the Czech border. He was going to send them in, but he wasn't there. They gave him that. They said, you can have it. We're not going to protect Czechoslovakia. If you guarantee the security of the rest of Czechoslovakia, which, of course, Hitler said he would do and then didn't, for a second, honor it. But they gave him land he didn't have. This is very, very different. Putin is in much of eastern Ukraine. His troops have actually conquered that area despite 2.5, nearly 3 years of fighting, despite all the billions and billions of dollars that we poured into that. The Russian army has, in fact, occupied much of eastern Ukraine. I think the total territory is like 20%, maybe 22%. Yes, there is a small Ukrainian incursion into Russia from northern Ukraine, from north of Kiev into part of Russia, but it's a very small area. I was looking at the map and I was surprised because you hear a lot, the Ukrainian army has penetrated into Russia. It's a very small area. Russia has far more of Ukrainian territory under its control than Ukraine has occupied of Russia. So there's no one's giving Putin anything. Putin took it, and he took it at a tremendous loss of life for his country and for Ukraine. Trump's right when he says he's not going to give it back. Now, when Trump says, Zelensky started the war, that's not true. Of course, that's false. But there's a kernel of truth to it, which is that the West provoked Putin. That doesn't make it okay. And once again, just because someone waves a red flag in front of you doesn't mean you get to punch him in the nose. But there were provocations. There were, the constant, we're going to take Ukraine into NATO, which obviously is a provocation. Because then Western troops are right there, right in Putin's face. So that's part of it. And I don't want to get into all the arguments. There was apparently a relatively pro-Russia government that was democratically elected. And then you had the Maidan Rebellion, whenever that was, 2014, I believe, which was fomented by the CIA, by Victoria Nuland, because they were too pro-peace with Russia. They weren't willing to, provoke Russia. So there's been fingers pointed both ways. I think the biggest indictment I have, actually, of Harris Biden is that after Russia did start the shooting in March of 22, February 22, and it was back and forth, they didn't move heaven and earth to end it right there, to figure out a way to, and in fact, they went just the opposite. When Russia and Ukraine were talking, and it looked like they were making real progress, Biden sends his English messenger boy there, Boris Johnson, to torpedo the discussions. So if you really are upset about what's happening in Ukraine right now, blame Harris Biden for failing to cut what could have been a fair deal in 22 and for promoting a war that would only continue to get worse and worse and worse. Christoph, desperate, though, to blame this entire debacle on Putin, quotes some Tory, right? A British Tory. Remember, the conservatives in the UK bear a lot of responsibility for this. So he finds this guy, Chris Patton, former British Conservative Party chairman, who says, well, and of course he throws in these insults at Trump. We have Trump and his oligarchy of ignorant shoeshiners, which is kind of interesting because if you're an oligarch, then you're in power. So most oligarchs aren't exactly shoeshiners, right? But I guess he's talking about the tech bros, the Zuckerbergs and the not Musk, because Musk seems well above the shoeshiner role, but the Amazon guy Bezos. And yeah, there's something to be said for that. Those guys are definitely kissing Trump's ring, and they're definitely bending the knee for him. So that is pretty darn serious. I don't disagree. We have real problems with Trump. But when he's actually doing something that's going to make things better, to start attacking him for that is so wrong-headed, so self-destructive. You lose all credibility. Then how do you argue against his cutting Medicare and Medicaid? How do you argue against him destroying the national park system, which is like one of the glories of our country? These are terrible, terrible things that Trump is doing. We need an alternative. And when you go after him for what is actually a good thing, you lose. No one's going to believe you. Why should anyone believe anything Nick Kristof says when he comes up with this crap? And to continue, he quotes Chris Patton, we have Trump and his oligarchy vandalizing the network of organizations, agreements, and values largely put in place by America since the Second World War, which have given most of us, including America, on the whole, an extraordinary degree of peace and prosperity. I find that statement is wrong on so many friggin' levels. America's workers have not enjoyed anywhere near an extraordinary degree of peace and prosperity since the end of the 60s, the beginning of the 70s. In fact, their status has steadily been eroded on a real wage basis. It's pretty much where it was. So you say, oh, well, hell, what do you mean it's so bad? They're the same place they were in 1970, except that the billionaire class, is 400 times richer than it was, or 25 times, 30 times richer, which means relatively working people have fallen very, very significantly. They've fallen in terms of prestige. They've fallen in terms of influence and power. They've fallen in terms of autonomy over their lives, the number of hours they have to work, the hope that their children can make it to a higher, a socioeconomic level. All of that has dropped. That's not an extraordinary degree of prosperity for Americans. And in terms of peace, wow, since World War II, peace, I don't know. As an American, I look back and I look at Korean War. I look at Vietnam War. I look at, the various little conflicts when Reagan was president. I look at Iraq 1, Iraq 2, Afghanistan. Wow, I don't see all that much peace, I'm sorry to tell you. Yeah, Europe, continental Europe has had more peace since World War II than it, because that was a continent that was always at war. You never had long periods of peace. Maybe after the 1640 the 30-year war ended in 1648. The Peace of Westphalia, I believe, is what it was. I could be wrong. I believe the Peace of Westphalia did result in some peace in Europe for a period of time. But no, this is true. That has been a continent at war. But to say America has had some sort of unprecedented period of peace and prosperity is just not the case. And when Christoph puts that in his piece as an argument against Trump, he loses a lot of, why should we believe him? And then he goes on to have this this torture porn, which kind of reminds me a little bit of, remember when when W was ginning up war against Iraq, and you had Sean Hannity day after day on his program talking about the rape rooms at Udi, I think was it Udi, the Saddam's son, right? I believe it was Udi Saddam Hussein, Udi Hussein, I believe, was, he had these rape rooms. You'll hear that over and over, rape room, because Hannity knew. He understood that phrase was going to get people so angry at Iraq that they would support an incredibly expensive and utterly unjustified war. Iraq was not responsible in any way for 9/11. Iraq did not have any kind of nuclear weapons capabilities, nor was it trying to obtain them. And Iraq was a far less Islamist country than some of our allies like Saudi Arabia. So you had to come up with some reason for regime change. So rape rooms. So here, which by the way, may have existed, but war invariably leads. I was listening to Chris Hedges about this. Chris Hedges. Chris Hedges, war almost invariably leads to far worse outcomes for girls and women, where many more of them become forced into sex trade or worse, they're just outright raped. And we've seen this throughout history. So the argument by Hannity that we need to protect the women of Iraq from Uday Hussein led to far worse outcomes for women. And here's exactly what Christoph is doing. He's trying to get you so angry at Putin and the Russians that we need to keep the killing going. So he talks about Russian torture chambers and Ukrainian children trafficked into Russia. And he talks about this woman who was subjected to electric shocks and beatings with cables. And it sounds so awful and so horrific and so terrible. And we want that to end, right? And you know how you get that to end? Stop the war. This is all happening because of the war. He says, I've covered so this war has meant torture chambers, according to Christoph, torture chambers, Ukrainian children trafficked into Russia, a woman subject to electric shocks. Well, if that's what the war means, then shouldn't we be trying to end it? Shouldn't we be pushing for no more of this? You've got a heck of a better chance of stopping Putin and his henchmen from torturing and raping and trafficking children when the war's over, when there's no more killing. The only alternative you have is you're going to say, we'll keep this going forever. Is that what you want? And then how many more children are going to be trafficked, and how many more people are going to be beaten, and how many more people are going to be tortured? It's just this is what frustrates me too, because if Nick Christoph says it, it doesn't matter how ridiculous and absurd his premise is, how easily you can debunk it. People are going to believe it. People are going to say, well, look, Nick Kristof says it. Who the hell are you, Hal Ginsberg? You don't write for the New York Times. You're not a columnist. Who are you to be pointing out flaws, weaknesses, misrepresentations in Kristof? We believe Kristof. Well, don't you have to have evidence to support him? I mean, his own arguments actually cut the rug right out from under him. And he even acknowledges that there's some argument against continuing this war. Trump is right. Europe is populous enough and rich enough that it could manage Russia on its own. But instead of managing a transition, Trump is close to switching sides. Okay, it's always not. Most of the time when wars end, it's very, very messy. We saw that in Afghanistan, right? When we pulled out of Afghanistan, Trump kind of negotiated it, and Biden, to his credit, to his great credit, followed through. And it was messy, and a lot of people were killed, and American soldiers were killed, and Afghanis were killed. It was bad. But it was still the right thing to do, because when wars end, there are power vacuums, warlords, other people rush to fill those vacuums, and they fight. Sort of like when if you imprison a drug dealer, a kingpin, then you may have a turf war afterwards, as you have more kingpins or more wannabe kingpins coming in, and they start killing each other. So when there's a power vacuum, a war ends, it's going to be messy. And that doesn't mean you don't end the war. It means you don't start the war in the first place. It means you do everything possible to prevent the war from getting out of hand if there is one. You do everything for a ceasefire. But we're well past that stage. The idea that there's this Russian bear, right? Kristof says that Europe is populous enough and rich enough on its own that it can manage Russia. But he's concerned. He's saying, well, but right now Russia's dependent on the United States, and we need to manage the transition to make sure that Russia isn't left as the one great power in Europe. Well, here's a flash for you. Russia ain't a great power. Russia couldn't defeat Ukraine. Now, those who would say, well, that's because the United States was there. That's because NATO was there. There's truth to that, of course. But we were, and I've heard this argument before, we were to a degree fighting with one hand tied behind our back. Ukraine's not a NATO country. And we weren't going to launch, nuclear weapons into Russia. If Russia tried to invade Poland, which is part of NATO, if Russia tried to invade any of the former Eastern Bloc countries, there would be a full-scale war. Russia knows that. Putin knows that. Putin's not he's not like a schizophrenic. He's not insane the way Hitler really was. He's clearly a realpolitik guy. He's trying to get as much for Russia as he can, build his empire as much as he can. Even so, he's not, and no one's saying you get all of Ukraine. No one's saying Ukraine's independence is going to go away. It is unfortunate. It's very, very unfortunate. I agree that the eastern part of that country is likely not to be part, is going to either be ceded to Russia or at least won't be part of Ukraine anymore. And some of those provinces are Russian-speaking, Donbass, Russian-speaking. I think Crimea is mostly Russian-speaking, although it's traditionally been part of Ukraine. So that's not good. But that's what Harris Biden should have thought about in the days immediately after Russia started the war, in response. And that's what they should have been working in the UN for with the whole time, rather than putting people like Victoria Nuland and neocons who themselves aren't interested in the least in democracy and freedom or anything like that. So right now, this is probably about the best one can hope for, is a negotiated peace where Russia keeps some of the territory, some of it is demilitarized, and Ukrainian independence is guaranteed through the UN. It has to be through the United Nations, but yeah, it doesn't get to be part of NATO. There's so much wrong with what Christoph writes. I just can't even, because again, this is a very influential, very powerful newspaper. This is a powerful columnist, and he's putting his thumb on the scale in favor of endless permanent war. That's the kind of stuff that makes me think, why should we have any hope? There's no institutional allies for the left. Have you heard, and speaking of, have you heard AOC come out and say, oh yeah, I don't like Trump, but I'm glad there's going to be peace there. I'm glad he's working to stop the war there. Yeah, I haven't heard her say that. I haven't heard one Democrat say that. This is one of the arguments we hear. Oh, we're safer because we've sent a message to China that if they invade Taiwan, they'll pay a heavy price. I find these arguments so absurd. First of all, Ukraine isn't Taiwan. Taiwan isn't Ukraine. Second of all, China is not this enormous mega power that it was aspiring to be and was getting close to be. I remember when I was on the radio in Monterey, and I used to say, hey, look, China's the threat. That's what Trump was saying, and I would agree with that. But China's economy is really in the dumps right now. China produces far more goods than it can sell. The tariffs that Trump started against China when he was president, the fact that, we didn't get, putting aside the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the tariffs against China, and that we're continuing under Biden, have done a number on the Chinese economy. And I'm not sorry about that. I want us to manufacture in this country, and we don't, but we're not buying so much as we used to from China. China's doesn't have the capability, anywhere near the capability of war with the United States. So they're not the threat that I feared they would become. And then China has another worry, a terrible worry. We heard people saying, "Oh, China will fight a two-front war or whatever if Putin and China are allies." India is the big threat to China. That's what China's worried about, is India. Bigger country than China on its southwestern border, right? That's what, it's nuclear power. That's where China's really worried. So, no, this isn't something, I'm not saying we take our eye off the Chinese. I'm not saying we view them as, an empty, an empty gun, but an unloaded weapon. But that's not what's deterring Chinese aggression. And we can still work with our allies in East Asia, just because we're saying now. I think that's a fair criticism of Trump, right? I mean, I think Trump needs to be. He's definitely trying to go it alone. It's this American sovereignty idea that we talked about with Arlen on Monday. He's just going to tell people what's what, not work with them. That's bad. Trump is hardly. Some sort of a paradigm of what we want as a leader. Not even close. He's terrible. But if you're going to criticize him, choose your battles. Criticize him for the bad things he's doing. not for trying to extricate us from a terrible war that we should never have been involved in the first place. All right. I mean, look, I made my case. I made it clearly. There's nothing more I can really say at this point. I think it's really not even, there's not really much of an argument for the other side. And you hear it all the time. And I remember even, when I had people call on the show who don't listen or don't call anymore, and they would say, oh, just wait. The Ukrainian offensive, they'll come back. They're gonna show Putin's what's what. And none of that happened. It became horrible at first, quagmire stalemate, like a trench warfare. And then ultimately the weight of the Russian bear showed itself, and they are slowly but surely winning. And this is the best way out of a bad situation. All right, 240-242-5646. I've talked a lot about Brianna Joy Gray. There's a lot about Brianna Joy Gray I like. This is a conversation she had with another podcaster. I guess I should reach out to get her on my show, except that I don't think I have a big enough audience for her. But let's play this and see some of the things she said that basically I say. But I want to shade them a little bit. And I also, I played Christoph. I disagree very vehemently with Christoph on the war in Ukraine. But here is somebody that I think has some cred, some gravitas, with whom I share very similar values in a lot of ways.
The small number of people who did get elected into Congress, who were progressives, who were the Justice Democrats candidates that did support Bernie Sanders and ostensibly espouse his values, the unwillingness to actually be adversarial with the Democratic Party demonstrated that the Democratic Party changes you. It's not the other way around.
All right. So I've been saying that forever, right? I mean, that's basically she's not mouthing my words. I mean, a lot of us have said that. But the point is that the Dem enter strategy, what Brianna Joy Gray is saying is that Dem enter strategy, we elect progressives, we elect people who campaign for health care for all. We elect Democrats who campaign for an end to the subsidies to the military-industrial complex. And they don't champion those policies. They don't. It's the other way around. The party changes them. They don't change the party. And so she's absolutely right there. It has become a dead end. I was, this video, in part, I mean, I saw it, I liked it, I was going to play it regardless, but it was timely because I've been having conversations with people who say how people don't want to listen to you because it's too depressing. You don't have solutions. And I do. My solution is, yes, we have to embrace an alternative, an emerging alternative to the two pro-war, pro-capitalist, pro-crony capitalist parties. We need to embrace a pro-environment party because there isn't one that has power, and we need to build it up. And the response was, well, no, we need to build the Democratic Party up and make it more progressive, and that we can. And you know what? If it were progressive, if there were. And it's really interesting. Like, I supported Bernie. I was all in for Bernie. I heard Sabby Sabs say, I think it was Sabby Sabs, maybe it was Norman. I can't remember the guy's name. He does all those programs in a really raspy voice, saying that the truth is, if Bernie had been president, he wouldn't have pushed for Medicare for all. He wouldn't have pushed for pro-people, pro-life policies. And I worry that's true. So here's more from Brianna Joy Gray.
And the Biden administration in particular, seeing 4 years of what it meant to have, or at least 2 years of what it meant to have all of Congress and the White House, and to still have the messaging be, he just can't do anything. It's not his fault. He just can't do anything. At a certain point, fine, I'm convinced. Democrats in power can't do anything. We have a lot that we want to do on the left. Right. So then how do you get that done? And it simply doesn't seem to me that it's possible to do it by electing enough AOCs. Because we've seen in really recent history some pretty bad examples of how AOC is willing to bend the knee and completely undermine her own political project.
Did anyone?
All right. So, I mean, it just seems so obvious too, right? I mean, what is untrue? What is inaccurate about what she said? It's completely the case. So what choice do we have but to build an alternative to the Democratic Party? And Brianna Joy Gray responds to those who claim it's too difficult. Here we go. Let me just, before I play more of that, I want to say, that was Joseph Guy Varghese. Remember, he was on her program, my old boss at Our Revolution. Oh, it's so hard. We can't do it. We can't build a Green Party. If you show me something that'll work, I'm down for it. But you know that Dem Enter doesn't work. We talked about this with Mike Olis. Mike was saying, well, I believe in the Democrat Party, I believe in, but then he had no, he in fact agreed. He goes, yeah, we saw this in Indiana. We got Democrats elected and then they vote for, building on nice, we have some land, a swamp, we have wetlands and they're ready to pave over the wetlands. And these are the Democrats. So, he used the word betray to describe Barack Obama. He betrayed working people. Bernie used the word betray to describe the way Democrats have treated workers. Where's the counter argument? Where's the example of Democrats going to the mat for working people since FDR? I mean, since LBJ. Where's that example? Because I don't see it. They're not a party of poor, struggling, working Americans, the Democrat Party. They're not a party of peace. You say, well, we need to infiltrate them and Dem Enter and make them better. But you might as well say that about Republicans. Why would you choose the Democratic Party to reform? It actually seems like the Republican Party is more able to change than the Democratic Party. The Republican Party has a president who is making peace with Russia, for crying out loud.
It's really difficult to surmount. My frustration, I think there's a way that if you acknowledge the reality that you're not going to be able to use the Democratic Party as a vehicle for real reform, then the follow-up that a lot of people offer is, well, we just got to stick with what we know doesn't work because there's no alternatives. The Green Party is insufficiently strong. PSL, Movement for People's Party, whatever else is out there in the ether, is even less likely than the Democratic Party to yield any dividends. And at least there's a real party here, and at least we can make some difference on the margins. And you can elect, an AOC or a Jamal Bowman, who at least is going to say the right thing sometimes about some big ticket issue. And when a Republican is in office, are willing to say that Medicare for all matters again, and maybe that symbolically means something.
Right.
My feeling is that you have to start trying to build alternatives and not be so put off by the difficulty of it or how you will in fact lose for a very long time while you're struggling to build something in the alternative, to not try in the first place. And there's this sort of ironic reality that I've observed on the left, where there's a real focus on saying, well, you're not going to be able to achieve successes through electoral politics. That's a sort of superficial, easy, low-hanging fruit way to engage in politics, which I think is completely fair. Yeah. And they say, well, in the alternative, you have to organize. It's going to take a long time. We have low labor density, for all the reasons that we know. But there's an appreciation of the fact that it's going to take time and it's going to take work to build up labor power. That same sort of willingness to not win instantly doesn't seem to attach to building third parties. And it's very confusing to me.
So that's a really good point that she made. And we went a long way there, but there was a lot to what Brianna Joy Gray was saying in that segment. But part of or at the end, her main point, and this is, I don't even fully agree with it. Her main point, though, is that you hear, and we're going to play a clip maybe from Chris Hedges in a little bit, that what we really need to do is build a labor movement, right? We have to have labor density. We have to have more unions. And that fight has been incredibly challenging and largely unsuccessful, right? even with a pro-labor, relatively pro-labor NLRB under Joe Biden, we saw very little ultimate increase in labor density. And the only labor unions that really seem to be growing at all are the government unions, and they're powerless to stop Trump from firing, wholesale government employees. So I don't even agree that, I agree that building a labor movement is a very tough slog, but I don't even know that it's tougher than. I think it's easier than building a third party, building up the Green Party. All that takes, it's not so hard. You just vote for the Green Party candidate. You go into the booth and you vote for the Green Party candidate, and that's the end of it. Getting a union in a what they call an open shop is incredibly difficult. Any organizer who raises their head, it gets chopped off. Union busting thugs come in and crack skulls. That's really, really hard to overcome that. I mean, my hat's off to the people who are able to accomplish it. It's tremendous. You put your livelihood on the line. And even if you're successful, the company can just delay and, put things off and wait till the next president comes in. So I don't even understand the argument from those who say, well, we need to take our time and build a labor organization because we can't. It's too hard to build a third party. No, it's a lot easier to build a third party. And people like Joseph Guy Verghese, they could easily be part of that vanguard. So then you ask, well, why aren't they? Why don't they? Why isn't there more of a movement from these institutional left groups? And I have my answer. I want to play a little bit from Brianna Joy Gray just to address why that hasn't happened. And then I'll explain again, because I think she's absolutely right. Her bottom line is the Democrat Party is a dead end. The Democrat Party doesn't change. It changes. It changes you. It doesn't change for the better. It changes the people who are in the belly of it. And it changes them for the worse. The AOCs and the Bowmans and even the Cori Bushes are very loath to challenge. Even when they're voted out of office, they're not going to criticize the party because they want to get back into it. Because they want to get jobs as MSNBC and CNN contributors. Because they want to get a column in a local newspaper, because they want to get a radio show or a podcast that gets, big name guests. So for all those reasons, even the people the Democrat Party crushes like a bug are unwilling in so many cases to truly take it on. I haven't even heard, maybe I'm wrong, did Nina Turner endorse Jill Stein? I don't think she did. I don't believe she did. I want to look that up right now. That's something I'm really curious about. Did she endorse? Because obviously she was very critical, as Turner was, of AOC. But, for going in that convention and saying, oh, Kamala's working day and night for ceasefire, which was complete lie. Just was flat out false. But I don't believe Nina Turner ever formally endorsed Jill Stein, somebody who was crushed. Turner was crushed by the Democratic Party establishment in Ohio. Somebody, by the way, she was next in line. When the Democrats say, oh, well, we want, the next in line. That's why Jerry Connolly is the chair now, the ranking Democrat in the, what's that group? The House Oversight Committee, right? Instead of AOC, Connolly waited his turn. Nina Turner was next in line. She had been a state senator. But they crushed her with, was it Fudge? Fudge had been the congresswoman from the Cuyahoga County in Akron, and then she was replaced by another, just basically functionary, right? who was tapped to run against the much more progressive Turner, right? So now I can't, I don't know who it was. This is killing me now. I can't figure out who who succeeded her in the House. Chantel Brown. There you go, Chantel Brown. All right, 240-242-5646 if you want to join me. So let me get to Brianna Joy Gray. No, I don't think Nina ever endorsed Jill Stein. I wish she had, should have had, she should have. But this just shows you again the power of that party. Somebody who's so much closer. By the way, AOC herself said, hey, Joe Biden and I shouldn't even be in the same party. But when push came to shove, she was out there saying, oh, we need Joe Biden to run for president in 2024. Even when it was absolutely clear to everyone concerned that he was demented. All right, here's Brianna Joy Gray on why there's so much reluctance to take on the party establishment, party leadership.
This is a Jimmy Dore idea. He's a polarizing figure.
Right.
This is an excuse for me not to buy in.
Yeah.
There was what felt like a really sort of irrational rejection of it that was very personality.
So she's talking about force the vote. And she's saying, hey, when we, meaning on the left, basically they were podcasters, live streamers, were saying, hey, let's force the vote for the Speaker of the House instead of it being Nancy Pelosi by acclamation. We'll withhold our support as Democrats, as progressive Democrats. We'll hold our support for her unless we get meaningful concessions. And yet, despite the obviousness of this, by the way, I have to say to my, just full disclosure, to my shame, when I was at Our Revolution, this was all going down. And I was misinformed. I believed that if AOC and her ilk had said, no, we're not going to support Nancy Pelosi for Speaker, then it could mean Kevin McCarthy, the ranking Republican, would become Speaker. That was false. That wouldn't have happened. And I was wrong. And I learned quickly I was wrong about that, but I made that argument at one point, and I'm very, very sorry. I should have been outspoken in favor of force the vote at Our Revolution, and I wasn't. And certainly the leadership at Our Revolution opposed force the vote. They are tight, or they want to be tight with House leaders. And if they're not tight with the leadership itself, with the Pelosi's and the Steny Hoyers, this is at that time, the Pelosi, Hoyer, Clyburn, if they didn't, they were ostensibly opposed to them and they sided with people like AOC, the problem there is that AOC wanted the approval of Pelosi. She wasn't prepared to take on Pelosi. Ro Khanna wasn't prepared to take on Pelosi. Jamie Raskin wasn't prepared to take on Pelosi, didn't want to take on Pelosi. So Our Revolution certainly wasn't going to try to push its peeps to do something that they weren't comfortable doing, even though that's why we did what we could to get them elected in the first place, but because we thought they would challenge Democratic elites. And of course they didn't. Here's Brianna Joy Gray detailing this fight.
I wrote a piece for Current Affairs attempting to lay out the strategy separate and apart from Jimmy Dore. So, okay, fine, you hate his guts. I don't know what happened back in the TYT days. I'm newer on the scene than that. But here's how you can understand this without ever having to click on one of his videos, right?
Yeah.
And in response to that, people were saying a lot of misinformation. Some of the most visceral opponents of it were opposing it on the basis, for example, that Kevin McCarthy would become Speaker of the House if the progressives withheld their vote for Nancy Pelosi, which couldn't happen because you don't need, it's not a bare majority that you would need. You need over 50% of Congress. So
I mentioned I was wrong on that too, although I learned quickly, perhaps from Brianna Joy Gray or some other folks, that it was a really good strategy. And no, it would not lead to a Republican becoming speaker.
Democrats voted affirmatively for a Republican speaker would not have defaulted into the position, even if they had gotten more votes than whatever alternative Democratic candidate were in the mix, if that makes sense.
Sure.
And again, we saw exactly this play out 2 years later with the Republicans. No matter how many times Kevin McCarthy wasn't speaker, Hakeem Jeffries didn't magically become speaker, right?
Right. So this was a really a great example of why Democrats were so proving how weak and feckless they were. Is Republican rump, the right-wing Republicans, the Boberts and the Georgia woman, now I can't remember her name. The Freedom Caucus, the Blackburns, they got what they wanted. They used their power, they used their leverage, and they moved Congress in the direction they wanted it to go. When AOC and Jamie Raskin were confronted with that, their response is, oh, that party can't get itself together. That party can't even speak with one voice the way we all do in support of a Hakeem Jeffries. And my answer is, no one elected you to speak with one voice. We elected you to go to Washington and pursue and pass legislation that would make life better for poor, struggling, and working people. And you're doing just the opposite. You're stymieing that.
That's not how it works. And there was historical precedent of this having happened like 100 times back in the early part of the 20th century. This could have been a real opportunity for progressives to show that they do actually have power. We're not looking for some time 20 years in the future where we've gotten 50 more AOCs in Congress. Right now, today, you can demonstrate the value of fighting for more AOCs in Congress, because even with 4 or 5 or 6 of them, they can have the Biden administration in a vice grip. And you can show Nancy Pelosi, this woman who's made your life hell, who made you cry on the floor over the Iron Dome vote, who whipped you all into shape, who you're cowering around calling Mama Bear because of God knows what she told you behind the scenes. You can demonstrate to her that you have a little bit of power on your own. And they chose not to do that for various reasons. I think a lot of it was interpersonal.
All right, I'm going to stop it there. So her explanation for why the squad didn't force the vote, and her explanation for why so many on the left in the institutional space didn't force the vote, is interpersonal. They don't like Jimmy Dore. They don't trust Jimmy Dore. They hate Jimmy Dore. But that's not really the reason. It was corruption. It was, we want to be leaders. We want to be part of this organization, the Democratic Party. We like the perks we get by being in this party, even though we know that this party is betraying workers. We know this party is abusing and mistreating the people who elected us. Or we know that in our group, our revolution, or PDA, we know that the Democratic Party is not fighting for our rank and file. We know that the Democratic Party is not there for our members, our union members. We understand that, but we get something out of it. We get access to power. We get invited to, rallies to speak at. We can use our connections to raise money. If we wait in the party long enough, we could become the chair of an important committee, and then the gates open for contributions, for raising more and more money for ourselves, for our re-elections, for golden parachutes when we leave Congress, or for getting into Congress if we're out of Congress, or for getting a job as a pundit. We lose all of that if we take on the party establishment, the party leadership. We lose all of that. We don't want to lose it. We don't want to give it up. We like our cushy little, hammock that we have. That's why they wouldn't do it. That's why they wouldn't force the vote. That's why Democratic left wing or progressive or whatever you want to call them institutions wouldn't join Force the Vote, because they're corrupted by the system themselves. They're benefiting from this horrible system themselves. All right, I have a lot more stories, but you know what? It's over the hour, and guess what? I can use those stories tomorrow. I won't call them evergreen exactly, but they're green enough that they're not going to go bad overnight. I really appreciate those of you who watch, who listen, who subscribe, who like. Please do all of the above. And I look forward to seeing you tomorrow on Halitics. And just don't forget, war is not peace. War is war, and war is not good for children and other living things. In fact, it's look, I used to wonder about this. Well, what's more important, freedom or peace? And look, if it's a choice between your freedom or peace, then maybe you fight. But that's not what we're looking at in Ukraine. We're looking at death, destruction, and no freedom for the people who are participating in it. And those who are in the territory that Russia occupies, they're not going to be free. Ongoing war ain't going to free them. I'm, for one, am hopeful that the killing will stop and the people of Ukraine can become freer, and the people of Russia can become freer through peaceful dialogue with Russia, not through bombs, missiles, guns, landmines, and more killing.